What episode is this again, Neil?
19.
Wow. Well, welcome, people. You heard it from the man himself, the world's leading authority on the American system of political economy, Mr. Neil Martin. This is episode 19 of the American System podcast. And as you can see on your screen, today it's Van Buren Denslow. And Neil is posing the question, if you attack protectionism, you like British colonialism. So a little background about Van Buren Denslow before I pass it on to the man himself. Van Buren Denslow, 1834 to 1902, was tariff editor of the Inter-Ocean, professor at University of Chicago, affiliated with the American Protective Tariff League, and president of the Philosophical Society of Chicago. He wrote the second best book of the 1880s, only behind William Elder. Van Buren Denslow's Principles of the Economic Philosophy of Society, Government and Industry gave us a lesson in what were the powers of governments. The government's primary task is to develop the population. It is not who should be at the top of the mountain kicking everybody so they will not become independent, economic-wise. Mankind has to introduce groundbreaking technology and bring an increase of energy flux density to the world. It's not supposed to create the economic conditions that the Act of Union did to Ireland or England's rule in India. Denslow gave us the countries who the British plundered, looted, destroyed, and depopulated. One will call it genocide. Countries like Portugal, Ireland, Turkey, India. Nobody, for protectionists, said that these nations met their downfall through British free trade. Free trade gets away with more mayhem and destruction than any system. The global South needs to wise up. They need to do a serious study into protectionism. President Lula and Xi, this includes both of you. Were we to take a look at Portugal, the free trade historians will not see the Methuen Treaty as a disaster. If we looked at India, the free traders would not say the British were satanic and that the Indians did not need domestic commerce and machinery. The markets decreed that they did not need it. We would also see that the famine was caused or was because of overpopulation. Does the global South say famine, which was genocide, benefited India? Were we to take a look at Turkey, we would not see free traders bringing up free trade tariff as the destroyer of Turkey. They will say Turkey was a sick man of Europe. Does the global South think free trade has no part to play in the destruction of Turkey? Of course. They are post-Cairns free traders. They are profoundly ignorant in economic history. Furthermore, if the free traders took a look at Ireland, they would answer that it was not the Act of Union that destroyed protectionism and killed home rule for Ireland, killed Ireland and brought a genocide there. They will not speak about one of Ireland's greats, Mr. Gardner, who said that over-importation of British goods into Ireland led to her utter devastation and ruin. Denslow, however, However, Denslow's great feat was when he outlined the functions of government and said that industrial nations are more than obligated, what industrial nations are more than obligated to do. Bring new methods, processes, and machinery to the world, and that they were for all of God's children, and that government had the power to educate, create artificial corporations, build economic infrastructure, and lastly, authorize banks to distribute and loan credit money. This is what I call protectionist thought. But the global South attacks protectionism. They are insulting the American protectionists who scathingly denounce colonialism. Did free traders do this? Will the global South acknowledge this? Well, Neil, the jury is out on that subject. Over to you.
Okay. First slide, Victor. Okay. This presentation is going to be, no, the first slide that shows the title of the podcast, Victor. Okay. This presentation is about Buren Denslow, one of the greatest economists of the 19th century. Buren Denslow has excellent protectionist thought, something the global South has not seen, something the global North has not seen. They don't know what protectionist thought is. They attack protectionism, but they don't know what protectionist thought is. What is protectionist thought? This presentation is going to show you what is protectionist thought, and then the audience at the end and the global South at the end will have to take a step back and say, we have it wrong on protectionism. The protectionists were the only ones trying to defend colonies, which they were. No other school of political economy. Free trade, they did not defend the rights of the colonies. So this presentation is called Van Buren Denslow. If Van Buren Denslow, Global South, if you attack protectionism, you like British colonialism. Letters to the Global South. Protectionism is good. Next slide, Victor. Okay, so the book's title is Principles of the Economic Philosophy of Society, Government, Industry, and the publisher is Cassell and Company Limited, New York, 1888. Next slide, Victor. Okay, so Van Buren Denslow's protectionist thought is going to teach us what protectionists take pride in. What you have to figure out while I am reading this, ask yourself, how does the news, how do economists measure an economy? What do they take pride in? I'll give you one thing. They take pride in the stock market. That's not how you measure an economy. That is not how you say, here's what we're giving to the future, right? So what separates the protectionist from everybody else? By means of this minute division of land, great diversification of employment, steady increase in wealth by production rather than by trade, competency is within the reach of every German. The government has wisely cared industries. As a consequence, there is a strong, active, intelligent love of fatherland and intelligence in the German armies, which fulfills the adage that bayonets think, and a capacity on the part of the people during war or peace to do anything that man can do and do it well. German literature and art are rapidly taking the lead in the world of ideas, as Prussian arms and diplomacy are in that of politics and nations. In theology, history, poetry, science, art, in universities and galleries, in books and paintings, in the stage and the church, Germany has achieved her greatest strides within the last half century. So, the first thing that people should take a note of is that Van Buren Denslow is saying Germany has great diversity of employments. Diversity of employments. That's a Carey term. Van Buren Denslow refers to Henry Carey as Dr. Carey in his political economy book, right? Now, diversity of employments. If you have a diversity of employments, that means you have domestic commerce, right? If you want domestic commerce to have a giant play field or a giant playground, you need diversification of employments, right? Then we go even further. He says that Germany would rather get wealth by production and not by trade. So that production must be going towards the physical economy and domestic commerce. He is saying we are not going to get our wealth by trade. The British system, John Carnes free traders, they get their wealth by trade. And what does trade care about? Trade doesn't care about anything. Trade will call Public Enemy, NWA artists. They will call Carney B and whoever who is out there. They will call them artists. They will call porn stars artists. They will call pop singers artists. Is that what you want? Is that what you really want to give the future? Oh, we present to you Carney B. This is the future. What did Carney B ever do to the future? What did NWA ever do to the future? What did Tupac and Biggie ever do for the future? Nothing. They did absolutely nothing for the future. Right? Sales of pop music. When I say pop music, I mean country, I mean rap, I mean rock. That's what I call pop music, right? The sales of whatever you want to call it. That's not wealth. Trade is not wealth. The mentality of the free trader does not produce wealth. And lastly, what I'll speak about, right? Van Buren Denslow said Germany is making great strides in literature, theology, history, poetry, science, art, in the universities, in books and paintings, in the stage, and the church. Now, when you watch the news, what does the news say about the U.S. economy? How do we know if the U.S. economy is doing good? Oh, by the stock market. The current president thinks if the stock market is doing well, the economy is doing well. This is how Americans think. This is how people think in general. They don't have protectionist thought. When has a free trader ever say, we don't want to get wealthy by trade. We want to produce and have domestic commerce. They're not saying that. If we take a look at history, what type of history? Who's your historian? Economic history. My historians for economic history are Frederick List and George B. Curtis. What's the free traders favorite economic historian. Who knows? Who knows? But they are not going to cover protectionist thought, right? So here we have Germany, right? Germany has achieved great heights, and Van Buren Denslow is proud of this. Were the British proud of this? No. Germany never recovered from what they were doing in the 1880s and 1890s. They never recovered, right? If you take a look at Germany today, Germany is the land of the savages. And what do I mean by land of the savages? You will see later on in the presentation, Germany is not doing anything at all to increase the pop relative potential dense relative potential density of the German population. It's not doing anything at all to increase the energy flux density of the economy. If they're not doing that, they're savages, right? When I say savages, it's an economic term meaning that the people are not advancing. Van Buren Denslow is saying in this quote that Germany is advancing at remarkable levels. And the way that you see this is in art, literature, theology, history, university, science. What is the global north advancing at? LGBT rights. Let's see. Anything else? We'll just stick to that. And also the environment. Yes. All right. Next slide, Victor. All right. So Van Buren Denslow, as I said, is going to give you protectionist thought. He's going to give you protectionist thought, government philosophy, right? And the government philosophy showcases a view of man. If you see Van Buren Denslow's government philosophy, focus on this. He is stating his view of man. The free traders don't have a positive view of man. If you do not have a positive view of man, you are not going to give man any type of powers. You are going to push for mankind to be irresponsible, such as what Adam Smith did in his Wealth of Nations book, right? So here's Van Buren Denslow. The attractive functions of government, as distinguished from its coercive, consist in the education of the youth, the establishment of lighthouses and life-saving stations, the distribution of seeds to secure the introduction of new branches of agriculture, the creation of artificial corporations, having perpetual life as a means of attracting the capital of investors into investments of a particular of a perpetual character, the building of levees to restrain floods and of canals, works of irrigation and aqueducts, the building or aiding of railways, common highways, sewers, drains, and bridges, the authorization of banks for the issue and loan of credit money, and of saving banks for making the hoarding propensity in the poor productive, ere yet the accumulation is large enough to be used as a working capital, enacting laws of decent, whereby human affection and love in one generation of workers may be attracted onward in their toil by the hope of being able to make provision for those they shall leave behind. All right. So this quote right here, this is Van Buren Denslow's government philosophy, something free traders do not want to talk about. If you ask a free trader, what is the government philosophy of a protectionist? And do not call President Trump a protectionist. That is a big insult. That's blasphemy. Egregious. It's sinister. It's insidious. Van Buren Denslow represents protectionism. Van Buren Denslow is just fantastic at government philosophy, right? And Van Buren Denslow is saying these are the attractive functions of government. So if we were to take a look at, I don't know, conservatives, the Confederate Revolution, which they call the Conservative Revolution, or Democrats, they are not going to call making advancements in agriculture, creating artificial corporations, building or aiding in building railways, authorizing banks to issue loan of credit money. They're not going to find that attractive. They're completely bankrupt in government philosophy. They're never gonna say this is the power of government. We should cherish doing this. And here's what I'm gonna say, right? No political economist out there that represents free trade today is going to be positive about artificial corporations. The government has the power to create artificial corporations. His highest excellency, Alexander Hamilton, outlined when he pimp slapped the hell out of Thomas Jefferson, saying it's constitutional to have a national bank. Ding ding, the best artificial corporation ever created by the government is the national bank. It is the national bank, right? The artificial corporation, you can also say NASA too. The artificial corporation shows you how creative government is. And if we take a look at the Democrats and the Republicans and their counterparts in Europe, they don't want to create artificial corporations. They want the private sector to do the job, such as central banks. A central bank is not an artificial corporation. It's a corporation by the devil. That's what a central bank is, right? So Van Buren Denslow is saying creation of artificial corporations. We're not done there, right? Then he says they will build systems of irrigation, canals, build or aid in railway construction, right? So he's saying an attraction function of government is building basic economic infrastructure. If you ask a Republican or a Democrat, what do you think about building infrastructure? They are never going to say it's an attractive function of the government. They're not going to look in glee and say, the reason why we want to build basic economic infrastructure is to do more producing and consuming. Also, to raise the relative population density. Also, to increase the potential relative population density of a country. These free traders, which you want to call Democrats and Republicans, the transatlantic system, they do not say, oh, building basic economic infrastructure is an attractive function of government. They see it as a burden whenever they have to spend money, as if spending money is the worst thing government can do. The worst thing government can do is to have the Thomas Jefferson disease. And what is the Thomas Jefferson disease? We don't want artificial corporations. We don't want artificial corporations. If you take a look at what His Excellency FDR did, his administration was all about artificial corporations, right? So we have that. And then The other part we have is very historic, right? Because we have a whole lot of people who think like savages when it comes to banking. They say, oh, government shouldn't do any banking at all. Oh, we don't need any banks. Oh, we don't need the Federal Reserve. You don't know what the Federal Reserve is. You don't know what a central bank is. You don't know what a national bank is. A national bank is distinct from the Federal Reserve and the central bank. Why? I will answer that question. Van Buren Denslow says an attractive function of government authorizing the banks to issue loans of credit money. What does that mean? It means that the government has credit. The government has credit. And the government is going to channel this credit into private banks and also to develop the economy. Van Buren Denslow is saying, oh, it is a attractive function of government to create credit. Wow. Does the global South like that? Because the global South, they demonize protectionism as much as they can. I was at a conference, a Chile Institute conference in May, and this one Chinese person, I can't pronounce his name right, so I'm not going to say it. He says he didn't like the 19th century commercial policy of the United States. He's talking about protectionism. He does not like protectionism. But does he know protectionist thought? If I read him this quote, he will completely agree with that. And I said, that's protectionist thought. That was created by a protectionist. And you're attacking protectionism. President Z, President Lula attack protectionism. The little people, the small people, the students in sub-Saharan Africa to India attack protectionism. They don't even know what it is, right? Van Buren Denslow said, one of the attractive functions of government is to issue credit. Oh my God, that is so beautiful. That is beautiful government philosophy, right? Not only do we have that, right? Van Buren Denslow says the role of the legislature, the role, the person, the human being, they want to leave wisdom behind for upcoming generations. What type of wisdom is the German government leaving behind for upcoming generations? Abandon nuclear power plants? What type of wisdom is the United States of America leaving behind for upcoming generations? Space shuttles retired and parked, once parked at the Air and Space Museum. What are they leaving? They're leaving behind nothing, no accumulations of the past. The future is not going to have any accumulations of the past because we have a horrible view of man. Because the people who are economists have a horrible government philosophy. Next slide, Victor. How was free trade avoided? So certain countries avoided free trade, and guess what? They prospered. Let's take a look at this. Had the continental nations at the close of the wars of France with the Allied powers in 1815 given England free trade in woolen goods, she could have spun and woven temporarily at a lower price than any of them. Every pound of cloth needed on the continent. This temporary ability would have concentrated the woolen manufacture for all these countries in England and would have deprived them of their own. Ireland, Portugal, Turkey, India, and to some extent China and Japan were conquered, dragooned, or purchased to adopt this policy. France, Spain, Austria, Russia, Switzerland, and Sweden owe their woolen manufactures to their adherence to the protective policy. So Van Buren Denslow is saying, after the War of 1815, six countries, Ireland, Portugal, Turkey, India, China, and Japan, went with free trade and allowed for the British to supply them with woolen goods. For Ireland, it was the Act of Union, right? So Ireland got pillaged, demolished. They got a famine in the 1840s. We're going to cover Ireland later on. Portugal did the Methuen Treaty again, which they did in 1703. If you practice sodomy and you do it again, you practice sodomy again. Portugal was sodomized twice by the British. Turkey, you might hear about Turkey being, let's see, the sick man of Europe, right? John Ramsay McCulloch, who has a big mouth, he called Turkey, he said Turkey had the Irish disease. What is the Irish disease? The Irish disease means that you're importing all these products from Liverpool, India. You have no domestic commerce. How can you survive? They did not survive. Then we have India. India had famines galore. 80 million Indians died of famine. That's genocide. Do the free traders ever defend that? What do they say? Oh, that was overpopulation. The British did not want countries having domestic commerce. They said, let us produce manufactured goods for you, and we will import raw foodstuffs and raw materials because you all produce that better. No. Not in my house. France, Spain, Austria, Russia, Switzerland, and Sweden said, not in my house, right? So, what's the legacy of France? The legacy of France in the 18th century, 19th century, and 16th century, a good part of her legacy is protectionism. And that is based on the man, the legacy, Jean Baptiste Colbert, who Henry C. Carey calls the greatest statesman and protectionist Europe has ever seen. Right? We have Russia. Russia went with protectionism in the 1820s. Austria did the same thing in various parts in their history. But the free traders never say that what France, Spain, Austria, Russia, Switzerland, and Sweden did, they never took care to brush upon it and say this had protectionism had them develop or protect her woolen industries. And why should these countries protect their woolen industries? Or maybe because they believe in promoting the general welfare. The free trade narrative on protectionism can only be upheld by people who are walking political lies. They're just speaking political lie after another, right? So Ireland, Portugal, Turkey, India got screwed by the British, right? Do the free traders ever say this? If we took a look at Ireland, lost population, India, lost population, they've really lost population, right? Turkey lost their domestic commerce. Portugal lost their domestic commerce. And we're supposed to think that in return of free trade, everything's going to be good. Just let British produce. Don't worry about having a domestic commerce. Worry about buying in the cheapest market. If you buy in the cheapest market, you are not a sovereign nation state. Tell that to the global south, right? This presentation is partly called Letter to the Global South. And the reason why it is a letter to the global south is that I'm afraid that the global south is not going to refute British free trade. I'm afraid that the global south is not going to look into the great works in political economy, and the great works of political economy were only written by protectionists in the 19th century. There were no free traders that wrote for mankind or wrote for civilization. Only protectionists did that. Protectionists fought against colonialism. Free traders never did that. Why? A free trader is never going to say a nation needs domestic commerce. A protectionist is going to say a nation needs domestic commerce. You can go to the next slide, Victor. Okay. Soulless sophists lack accountability. If there's one thing that Van Buren Denslow hated, it was encyclopedias. And you know what? I understand that, right? And encyclopedias, they're just political lies concerning politics and economics. They're just massive political lies, right? And a professor is a walking vending machine of political lies. And here is Van Buren Denslow. Here are two free trade authorities, the professor and the encyclopedia. The professor boldly assuming that the repeal of the Corn Laws made bread cheap and therefore built up the colossal manufactures of England, and the encyclopedia trying to prove that the withdrawal of protection from the farmers benefited them, for breadstuffs sold higher correctly, and they slow that bread was not permanently cheapened. So that which the Oxford professor offers as a demonstration turns out to be a falsehood, right? Okay, so there's 2 points. One made by the soulless professor, one made by the encyclopedia, which has no accountability, right? When you see lies in Wikipedia or in encyclopedias, who's held accountable? It's just like the news. The mainstream news blatantly lies about Russia and China. Do they ever take accountability for that? Do they ever say, oh, we got it wrong on Russia and China? Have they ever said we got it wrong on Lyndon LaRouche? Right? They have never said that. So we have two things, right? The professor of Oxford is saying that the repeal of the Corn Laws had England's manufacturing sector boom as it grew as never before. That's baloney. The way that England's manufacturing sector boomed is through the Industrial Revolution. If you didn't have the Industrial Revolution in England, they would have never made so much progress in manufactures, right? So that's one big lie. The, the repeal of the Corn Laws did not give new life, or it did not create the conditions for England to have a massive manufacturing boom. You need machinery to have massive manufacturers, right? So we caught the professor in a lie, right? Then we go to the encyclopedia. Let me add something. The repeal of the corn laws. What were the corn laws? They were called the grain laws. What were the grain laws, right? The grain laws were laws that said grain X being any grain that England imported will be subject to a tariff to protect agriculture in the United Kingdom. This means that this means that England had an agro-industrial economy. Free trade does not want to see an agro-industrial economy. They don't want to see domestic commerce. Right? I state again, free trade does not want to see an agro-industrial economy. Right? The British said, we have a comparative advantage in manufacturing. You have a comparative advantage in agriculture and raw materials. Let us provide you with manufactured goods, and we will take your foodstuffs and raw materials. What type of people fall for this? Free traders. The global south is running their economic system like this. I have never seen someone from the global south say we have to prioritize domestic commerce over foreign commerce. I've never seen it. I've never seen it, right? If someone wants to show to me on how the global south has universities saying that domestic commerce is more important than foreign commerce, I would say I made a mistake. But I did not make a mistake. The global south is not putting any type of emphasis on domestic commerce. They think free trade is the game, right? Now we're going to the encyclopedia. The encyclopedia said, they said that if we remove protection, there's going to be prosperity for the farmer. I mean, how stupid are you if you think this is true? You let the UK farmer compete with the farmer abroad. The UK farmer, they need a home market. Do not mess with the home market. If you give your home market over to foreign countries, you have committed economic treason. And that's what people should see it as, right? The encyclopedia said, oh, the farmers prospered. If the farmers prospered, how come so many farmers went into manufacturing districts looking for labor? Do you call that prospering? Sir Robert Peel, a devil, was asked, what did we get with the repeal of the corn laws? Cheap labor. He said it proudly. He said cheap labor. Where did that cheap labor come from? It came from the farmers that were driven off their land. The professor at Oxford, the encyclopedia, are blatant liars. They are lying about free trade. There are so many liars about free trade. I will spend eternity telling you about the lies of free trade. All right, next slide, Victor. We have a protectionist constitution. Dear Global South, The United States of America has a protectionist constitution. The reason why we have a protectionist constitution is because we have brilliant people who had a brilliant government philosophy, like His Excellency Benjamin Franklin and His Excellency Alexander Hamilton. The global South, if you ask somebody from the global South, is protectionism constitutional? They'll probably say no. We know that a free trader will say no. Hell, the Democratic Party under Grover Cleveland saw protectionism as unconstitutional. That is economic treason. That is high treason if I ever seen it before, right? Because when you attack protectionism, listen carefully, Global South. When you attack protectionism, all you do is make the British Empire happy, right? So here's the quote. But the government of the United States would search in vain in the federal constitution for any clause empowering it to prohibit any domestic production for any purpose. It has never tried it, and the thought of it is preemptorily inadmissible, and from the American standpoint, despotic, wasteful, cruel, and barbarous. Since without the power to suppress the domestic production, we cannot prevent the duty on the importation from acting with a protective effect. All right. Okay. So if you want domestic production, you're saying if you want domestic production, you want domestic commerce. When you say you want domestic production, you are not saying we're whores for free trade and whores for foreign trade, right? When you attack protectionism, let me repeat this again. When you attack protectionism, you are attacking domestic commerce. Because the only way you get domestic commerce is with protectionism. The only way you get domestic production is with protectionism. Domestic production is not for your country to be the workshop of the world. It's not for you to enslave other countries and have them become debtors. The British never had equal trading partners. They never respected their trading partner, right? And so domestic commerce, right? Domestic commerce is in the US Constitution. It's talking about Congress shall have the power to regulate trade and commerce. What does regulate mean? Does regulate mean procrastinate, be irresponsible? Regulate means act proactively in ordering and organizing your economy. Free trade and being a whore of irrational foreign trade is not how you organize an economy, right? Furthermore, domestic production goes with the harmony of interest, right? You have domestic commerce, you have domestic industries, and you have protecting your currency. How are you going to protect your currency if you're not protecting domestic industries? I would like someone to say, "Oh, you can protect your currency. You can protect your currency without protecting domestic industries." That is absolutely false, right? The government should protect the currency, not the central bank. Any government that has the central bank regulate the currency is not promoting the general welfare. We take a look at the global south. The global south They have central banks. What do central banks do? Find me a central banker that says we need domestic commerce. Find me a central banker that says we need domestic production. You're not going to find one because they're all free traders, right? The global south, they want to huff, huff, huff. Look at me, how strong I am. We have ended colonialism. You haven't ended colonialism. Colonialism is still standing. And the reason why colonialism is still standing is because the global south is putting irrational foreign trade over domestic commerce. You do not have domestic production for foreign trade. You have domestic production for domestic commerce. And I'm going to say this, right? John Lord Hayes and Simon Cameron in the 1840s stated that the United States of America should produce 9/10 of what they consume. What is this saying? If they're saying the government should produce 9/10 of what they consume, they are saying domestic production is important. Domestic production is important for domestic commerce. Dear Global South, wise up. Next slide, Victor. Okay, Denslow rejects the zero-sum game. So what I'm going to talk about relative population density, right? So you have a square mile, right? You introduce technology in that area, existing technology. That's your your relative population density, right? If we take a look at India, Ireland, Turkey, Portugal in the 19th century, if we look at their relative population density and compare it to the nations that had protectionism, you would see that the protectionist nations had a higher relative population density, right? And then we have the zero sum game. The zero sum game is not going to allow for peace through development, right? The sole purpose of an economist is to do political fighting and to raise the relative population density. It is not to be a whore of geopolitics, right? Here we go. This is Van Buren Denslow. Industry needs to be migratory in order to attain its highest evolution. It must carry the old pursuits, stock raising, farming, lumbering, and house building, to new countries and carry them on under new conditions. It must carry them on in old countries with new methods, processes, and machinery. It must discover new utilities and well known substances, new economies and familiar callings, new plants and animals for the food of man, new soils for producing them, and new manures for restoring exhausted soils. So long as old industries pursued in the old way continue to be a means of certain livelihood to those engaged in them, the tendency of employers will be to meet that declining rate of profit. Okay, so Van Buren Denslow is saying what we are going to do, we are going to introduce our technology to new countries, our technology into new countries. And I want the global south to answer this question. If you think colonialism is still not the mindset, of the United States of America, in Europe, the United States of America wasn't a colonial power. Now they act as a colonial power. In Europe, right? The United States of America and Europe in the 1880s. So we'll take the United States out in the 19th century. If we take a look at Europe in the 19th century, they had a policy of zero growth. They were not going to develop colonies. They were not going to do it at all. Van Buren Denslow was saying, hold on, no, we can't do this. These new countries, they need to develop. Right? Okay, they said they need to develop. A protectionist is saying this. Does Xi Jinping and President Lula still want to say that protectionism is the big bad wolf? They don't know what protectionism is. They have never read a single book by a protectionist. And they want to talk about protectionism. That's disrespectful. Xi Jinping and President Lula, they're acting like rookies. What do you have to know about rookies? They know nothing. These rookies know nothing about protectionism. I am giving a presentation on protectionist thought. Xi Jinping and President Lula, they would agree to what I am saying. They have to stop bashing protectionism because it was a protectionist that defended you. The free traders didn't defend you. You're attacking protectionists, and that is wrong. I'm getting sick of it, right? And so Van Buren Denslow is saying, okay, we need to step up our game. We need new methods, we need new processes, and we need machinery to develop our countries, right? That's what he's saying that. When have you seen a European or someone from America saying we need new methods, new processes, and machinery? They don't talk about it, right? And then we go on even further, right? Well, here's what I'm going to say. You judge a political economist on what powers does he says man have. That's how you judge a political economist. And protectionists were the best political economists because they told us what are the powers of man, right? Okay. It must discover new utilities and well-known substances, new economies and familiar callings. That means new improvements in familiar callings, new plants and animals for the food of man, new soils for producing them, and new manures for restoring exhausted soils. He is saying that man must find new improvements in familiar callings. Okay, new improvements in familiar callings. Let's take a look at energy flux density, right? We went from wood, coal, gas, oil, hydropower, nuclear power. Has the global north introduced nuclear power to third world countries? Hell no. It's the global north saying we're going to give fusion power to the third world. Hell no. They're practicing the zero-sum game. And Van Buren Denslow is saying we will discover new economies in familiar callings. That is a wonderful view of man, right? Take a look at this, right? When John F. Kennedy was stating that we were going to put a man on the moon, what was that? That was a fantastic view of man. When has that ever been said by a president since John F. Kennedy? It has never been said by a president of the United States of America. This is over 60-something years that a president has never said We must discover new utilities and well-known substances, new economies and familiar callings, new plants and animals for the food of man, new soils for producing them, and new manures for restoring exhausted soils. This is a beautiful view of man. This is saying we do not buy the zero-sum game. We do not buy the prime directive. All mankind is going to progress, right? That's peace through development, right? So if you want to call protectionism evil, you might as well call Van Buren Denslow evil. And if you call Van Buren Denslow evil, that is an economic war crime. You don't talk about protectionists that way. You will not say to me that protectionism is bad in front of my face, because I'll give you a lesson in political economy, right? Van Buren Denslow is doing awesome political fighting. All right, next slide show, Victor. The British in Ireland. Protectionists told the truth about Ireland. Free traders didn't. The British government at one point denied that there was a potato famine. They still lie today about what caused the Irish potato famine and genocide. They don't even want to call it genocide. They say it was overpopulation, right? Do free traders. I've never seen anybody in the global south attack the British on what they did to Ireland. Who had Ireland's back? Matthew Carey, Henry Carey, Henry Carey Baird, Van Buren Denslow, and a whole lot of and other protectionists, right? Taxation by profits of enforced trade, Ireland, from 1698 to this day. That's almost 200 years. Great Britain has been one nation and Ireland another as respects taxation. Never in a single instance has a British parliament or influence of any kind aimed to legislate or administer in a manner to foster Irish interests or to place them on any equality with England. Every act of British taxation has treated Ireland as an alien country whose interests were to be subordinated to Englishmen's profits, so far as 3 centuries of history is the cause. Both of the chronic disloyalty of Ireland and the conviction so generally felt by intelligent men of other nations that England not having moral sagacity to rule Ireland fairly. All right. Van Buren Denslow is saying the British Parliament never did anything to lift their finger to help the Irish. And the Irish were not being represented by the British. They took away the powers of the Irish Parliament, and the British said, "We're going to govern for you," right? In 1783, Gardner, a great Irish hero, one of the greatest Irishmen ever. Does the global south know about Gardner? I don't know. Probably not, because they love free trade history. And whenever you apply free trade, you can walk on water. You can turn water into wine. You can fish for 1,000 people. That's free trade. Free trade has done nothing wrong, right? So the 1783, Mr. Gardner makes a speech in the Irish Parliament, and he says, that it appears to this House that the working manufacturers of this kingdom are in the greatest poverty and distress, that importation of foreign manufacturers into this kingdom has of late considerably increased and still continues to increase, and that this great English importation, by impeding our manufacturers, is the cause of this poverty and distress. Letter to the Global South. Find out about how the Irish were fighting for protectionism. They were not fighting for free trade. Stop acting like concubines of the British and Americans. Please find out what protectionists did, right? Because you don't know. You're like a rookie. You don't know, right? Okay, so the Irish had protectionism adopted in 1783, but the Act of Union came, which destroyed Ireland. It destroyed domestic commerce. It took away protectionism. And Irish has been nothing since then. The British don't want to say, here's what we did to Ireland after 1800. All of their industries we destroyed, just like what they did to India. They want to call that good. Dear Global South, please find out what the Act of Union did to Ireland, and you still want to talk about free trade. What are you? You like Joseph Stiglitz that says globalization can work? I'm sorry. A sexual transmitted disease is not good for you. Don't say a sexual transmitted disease is good for you. When you say free trade is good for you, you're saying a sexual transmitted disease is good for you. And that's just bonkers, right? So the Irish got screwed by the British. Van Buren Denslow stated, the Act of Union destroyed Ireland. The British wanted to govern over Ireland. If we take a look at the 19th century, we've already seen Ireland's domestic commerce was crushed. It was destroyed, right? Their relative population density collapsed because of genocide. Why doesn't the Global South look at what happened to Ireland and then come back to me and tell me if they still like free trade? They should tell me, oh, Neil, the greatest protectionist alive. Yes, I'm the greatest protectionist alive, right? They need to tell me that the Act of Union saved Ireland. If you think the Act of Union saved Ireland, sign an Act of Union with the United States of America and England and have England and the United States govern over you. Do that. Do that, Global South. You want to talk about your fighting colonialism. You love British free trade. You love free trade, and you're saying we're fighting against colonialism when you love free trade. Right? Next slide, Victor. The British love for free foreign trade. Okay, this is the last slide. Global South. The greatest free trade country in the 19th century was the British. I think you should know their foreign policy, and I'm going to give it to you. All right. No assumption is more frequent in economic discussion than that England not only practices but steadily illustrates free foreign trade. No fact has entered so prominently into modern history as that England has constantly made use of her armies in India, Ireland, Turkey, Egypt, Africa, New Zealand, Borneo, China, and Japan. and among all barbarous people to coerce foreign trade, or as she expresses it, to open barbarian ports to civilization. If one nation practices military protection on behalf of her foreign trade, the result may be as efficient in its way as another nation, differently situated, may achieve by practicing tariff protection in favor of its home trade. Dear Global South, please learn your economic history. How in the world can you say you're fighting against colonialism, European colonialism, and you don't know the economic history of the British? You don't know the foreign policy of the British. Hello. Here, this is it. India, Ireland, Turkey, Egypt, Africa, New Zealand, Borneo, China, and Japan were visited by British armies to expand British foreign trade. They weren't looking for protectionism. They were looking for free foreign trade. Here's what they told you. We are going to open your ports because you're barbarians, right? We, the British, we are the great civilizers. We will civilize your nation with free trade, and you're going to love it. What is the global South doing towards this? They want to attack protectionism. They haven't even read His Excellency Henry C. Carey, right? They haven't read Van Buren Denslow. Van Buren Denslow gave us a beautiful protectionist thought in this presentation. Letter to the Global South. If you attack protectionism, you like British colonialism. Why do I say that? It was the protectionists that were fighting British free trade. Van Buren Denslow was saying, India, trade partner, colony of England, Ireland, lapdog, colony of England, Turkey, debtor in trade, Egypt, debtor in trade, colony, Africa, New Zealand, Borneo, China, semi-colony, Japan. They were all taken advantage by the British. I know the global South doesn't want to take advantage of countries, but you got to do something. You got to understand that you got to give these countries domestic commerce. That's all I'm asking for. I'm asking you to give these countries domestic commerce and instill in them the proper government philosophy. Please read His Excellency Alexander Hamilton. Understand why it is so important to have artificial corporations, right? We need to see a day when all countries have governments that can authorize for the issue of credit. That's what we need to see. We do not need to see foreign trade dominating the whole world. We need to see a situation where domestic commerce is king. We do not want free trade because the British, they use armies in India, Ireland, Turkey, Egypt, Africa, New Zealand, Borneo, China, and Japan, and they love free trade. You don't want to connect England's foreign policy with free trade? Are you stupid? For real, are you stupid? You don't want to connect British foreign policy with free trade. You have to connect British foreign policy with free trade. And this is what Van Buren Denslow does so well in his book. The end.